Elite Dangerous Odyssey has some significant problems. It's not all bad, of course. There are a lot of people enjoying it. You only need to take a look at the forums or Reddit to see that. However, it's impossible to argue that Odyssey isn't a mess, because it really is. Now, I've held off on a while to release this video as I wanted to see how things played out. However, there really is a subject we need to talk about, and it's really not Odyssey, at least not specifically. Odyssey is a symptom of a wider issue, and that wider issue is Frontier and its communication strategy. Let me be very clear when I say this next part. The communication problems are not caused by the Elite community management team, who actually do a fantastic job. The CM team do a lot of good work with conveying the information that they are allowed to convey. They also gather a lot of feedback and take it to the relevant parties in-house. Also, to be perfectly clear, the problem doesn't rest with the developers either. So if I'm not talking about the community team's communication with players or the developers, then what am I talking about? Well, to put it very simply, there is a cultural issue within Frontier. I strongly believe that somewhere within Frontier there is a communications block. There's no way to know where this is or why it's happening, but the writing has been on the wall for years at this point. Ultimately, I believe the problems we see in Odyssey have resulted from this communications failure. The very real problem now is not only has this failure led to a botched release, but it is also leading to damaging the player base as a whole. An online game thrives from a happy, active community, whether that's individual players, large groups, event organisers, third-party tool developers, streamers, podcasters or YouTubers. The fact is that no matter where you look, there are a lot of very unhappy people. Here's just two examples. Lave Radio, typically a very upbeat podcast, has recently had very little positive to say. This isn't their fault, they're simply discussing the reality of Odyssey and Frontier as they see it. Another high-profile example, and one that Frontier really should be concerned about, are the organisers of the Distant Worlds expeditions. So far, there have been 2 Distant Worlds expeditions. These were highlights for the community involving tens of thousands of players and huge amounts of press coverage from the gaming media. Odyssey should have inspired the introduction of Distant Worlds 3. Unfortunately, Distant Worlds 3 has now been put on indefinite hold. Don't underestimate how significant this is. Distant Worlds is a huge deal for both Elite and for Frontier. So the fact that the next Distant Worlds is on indefinite hold, not just due to the problems with Odyssey, but also, according to its organisers, the problems with how Frontier as a company dealt with the player base. Well, this is all extremely sad to hear, not only because of what it says about the current state of Odyssey, but also, and more importantly, because of what it says about the feelings that are starting to set in within the community. There's a feeling within many areas of the community that Frontier now need to start changing their approach with how they deal with the players. Again, this isn't a problem with the community team or the developers, it's a cultural and policy issue with how Frontier discuss development. For the past years, Frontier have put up a vast wall around game development. They refuse to discuss the inner workings and thought process of development, as well as the future of Elite Dangerous. With the pre-release of Odyssey, Frontier showed a few dev diaries, however these were pure PR videos rather than videos that gave insight into the development. What this means is that the player base is cut off entirely from Elite's development. Elite is a live service game after all, and as such, feedback needs to be a two-way process. Currently, Frontier listen to forum posts and bug reports. They often act anytime there is a huge outcry, such as with the high-priced fleet carriers or the botched Odyssey release. However, there's no real, true, heartfelt conversations from the developers or the management. And again, pointing out the developers not getting to really communicate there, I don't believe that's entirely their fault or their choice. Of course, developers have made the appearance on a few live streams, and I know they've also taken a lot of flack from the community, which is, entirely wrong. But again, I think this really comes down to frustration from the player base and how Frontier approach the whole communication process. Now, this did change a little bit last week with 2 forum posts by David Braben. This in itself highlights how serious Frontier now take in this situation. Further, David mentioned that Frontier will be releasing a roadmap of how Odyssey will be fixed. So then, this is a real opportunity for Frontier, an opportunity for a course correction, which has led to this moment with Odyssey, not just a broken game and a fracturing community, but also a rapid drop in share prices. The company has lost literally hundreds of millions in value over the past few weeks alone. So the fundamental problem is deeper, and Frontier need to change how they talk to the community. The roadmap then is a start, and let's take a look how that can work. Firstly, and most importantly, Frontier need to move away from their traditional vague communication. That is precisely what led to this moment. Sure, Frontier do things differently to other companies, and often that works out very well. But on other occasions though, like now, it backfires dramatically. The roadmap then needs to open up the channels of communications. Here's a few examples. Let's start with Star Citizen. Roadmaps frequently come in for a lot of flack. The good side of the Star Citizen roadmaps is that they give an indication of development. They give some transparency. However, Star Citizen's roadmaps frequently change. But when this happens, CIG either say nothing or they put some spin on it. So this really isn't what we want when Frontier talk about a roadmap. Players might want a roadmap given some transparency, but they also want something that is completely open and honest. Rust and Subnautica then have roadmaps along these lines, as does Valheim. All of these are very, very good examples. But perhaps one of the best examples is from Asobo Studio, the development team behind Microsoft Flight Simulator. Not only do they have a roadmap, but they also have an amazing communications policy. This open communications policy means that if a roadmap has to shift or change, it really isn't a problem for the player base, as they really understand what's going on and where the developers are coming from. Now, in specific terms of the roadmap, the Flight Simulator roadmap shows the development and community releases for the next 3 months, given release windows and specific days. But more importantly than all of this, Asobo have a feedback snapshot, which essentially is the top most voted bugs and wishes from the community. Asobo then actively discussed these problems and wishes. The company also treats the player base like adults, as they understand with active communications the players will very likely be understanding of any situation, which in short leads to a lot less frustration and a lot less aggression towards Asobo. So here's an example of something you would never see Frontier say or do. One of the most highly requested features for Microsoft Flight Simulator is helicopter support. Asobo have spoken about this. They haven't been vague, they've been very specific. They've said that they will work on this, but they've said it won't happen until at least 2022 or 2023. They understand that by being open, they're not setting the community up for disappointment, but rather they're showing trust in the community and giving them insight as to where things stand and what may and may not be possible. Asobo are very willing to say no, and that is important. Microsoft Flight Simulator's feedback snapshot then shows the current top issues. It also gives a current status in addition to giving a release window, even if that window is years away. It works, and it works very well. In addition to this, the company has a monthly Q&A with the devs. During this Q&A, the community manager addresses questions from the community to the developers. Interestingly, the community manager will often throw difficult questions at the devs and will quite often call them out if they try and evade a question. It's a process that works extremely well overall, but of course it isn't perfect, and sometimes there's miscommunication or issues get marked as fixed when they are in fact not. However, Asobo are quick to admit their mistakes. This then is the complete opposite approach to Frontier. Frontier's lack of communication now needs to change, and it's really imperative because not only is it damaging the game, but like I say, it's clearly and evidently damaging the player base. I'm not saying that they need to follow Asobo's lead. What I am saying is they now need to be more open and more honest and allow the player base a look into the development process, whether that's the next months or the next years. Of course, no one is asking Frontier to reveal all of their plans and all of their roadmaps, but they really need to make a change. A roadmap then is definitely a good start to all this, but it really needs to come from an open and honest communication. It needs to come from a cultural shift within Frontier. Without that, Frontier risk not only breaking Elite, but also completely shattering the player base. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.